By 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte had defied expectations for nearly 2 decades. He had risen from an obscure artillery officer to Emperor of France, achieving a level of military dominance that made him appear unstoppable. He had defeated coalition after coalition and redrawn the map of Europe. Kings feared him, and entire nations adjusted their domestic policies to appease his influence. But his authority rested on a fragile foundation. Unlike monarchs with ancient bloodlines, his legitimacy came from the battlefield. Every defeated enemy and expanding border reinforced his position. The empire required continuous momentum to survive. Halting his conquests meant halting his displays of strength, risking a collapse of the political system he had spent years constructing. Among the few major powers still resisting French influence was Russia. Economic disputes and political disagreements had steadily deepened the mistrust between the two empires. To eliminate this threat, Napoleon assembled the Grand Army. He pulled together hundreds of thousands of hardened veterans from across his territories, creating a force of intimidating scale. His plan relied on a tested formula: advance quickly, crush the opposing army in a decisive engagement, force political concessions, and return home with a victory. His enemies usually collapsed quickly after these aggressive pushes. He assumed this campaign would end as rapidly as his previous European wars. He was attempting to apply a perfectly tuned strategy to a geography and an opponent that operated by different rules. The Grand Army pushed into Russian territory with an aggressive pace, seeking the swift, crushing clash that would end the conflict. The Russians refused to provide it. Instead of holding their ground, their forces steadily retreated, denying the French the decisive battle they needed to secure a treaty. This diagram illustrates the concept of logistical overextension. In Central Europe, military campaigns relied on dense, manageable supply networks between close cities. In Russia, the French were forced to maintain a single, constantly lengthening tether into an isolated, sprawling landscape. As that line stretched over hundreds of miles, communication slowed, equipment broke down, and massive food shipments failed to reach the advancing troops. Turning back without a victory was unacceptable to his political standing, so he ordered his men to keep marching. He was fighting a geographic trap mathematically designed to exhaust an invading force before they ever saw the enemy. As the French pushed deeper into this void, they encountered a brutal scorched earth defense. Retreating Russian units systematically burned their own fields, abandoned their villages, and removed any resources that might sustain the invading army. Exhausted and hungry, the French eventually reached their geographic goal, the symbolic heart of the empire, Moscow. They found a city that was largely empty. Shortly after their arrival, massive fires broke out, consuming entire districts and destroying any remaining shelter or supplies. Napoleon waited in the smoldering ruins, expecting Russian leaders to recognize defeat and negotiate a surrender. No envoy arrived. Capturing a burning city without securing a political agreement erased his momentum. The invasion instantly shifted from aggressive conquest to a desperate struggle for survival. Realizing peace was not coming, the French finally abandoned Moscow to retreat westward. But time had run out, and the seasons were changing. The Russian winter arrived. Temperatures plummeted, and heavy snow buried the landscape, paralyzing the exhausted troops as they struggled to survive. The march became a nightmare. Men froze during the night. Pack animals perished in the cold, forcing soldiers to abandon their equipment, while starvation steadily broke down discipline. A series of small freezing disasters along the endless icy roads consumed the Grand Army, achieving what no single opponent had managed on a traditional battlefield. The uncompromising reality of distance and weather had dismantled the most feared fighting force in the world, rendering them helpless. This chart shows the human cost of the campaign. Of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who marched into Russia, only a shattered fraction returned in organized condition. Napoleon physically survived the march, but his most powerful political weapon had died in the snow, his aura of invincibility. Seeing proof that the emperor could bleed, rival nations grew bolder. New coalitions emerged across Europe, initiating the conflicts that would ultimately dismantle his empire. His extraordinary past brilliance and repeated successes were the exact factors that blinded him to his own limitations. Confidence encouraged risk, and constant victory made him believe no obstacle could stop him. Great empires do not fall overnight. They begin to collapse the moment their leaders mistake past victories for future guarantees.